This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories. China's president in Kazakhstan for a second day, bidding to deepen economic and diplomatic ties with former Soviet states at a summit with Central Asian leaders. Donald Trump makes an early exit from the G7 summit, conflicting messages from him and his staff about whether helping to negotiate an Israel-Iran ceasefire is the reason. And on the ground in the Middle East, the two longtime foes exchanged more strikes. Explosions are heard in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, while citizens flee Tehran. Energy demand on the rise in Asia, but are renewables a must-have for supply security? We discuss with experts and business leaders at an industry gathering in Kuala Lumpur. Ahead on East Asia tonight, nuclear arsenals are being modernized and expanded. One report says China is building up faster than any other country, while America, according to another, spent more last year than all the nuclear-armed countries combined. And a special report looking at how the private sector and foreign investors are helping to fill gaps in China's healthcare services amid a rapidly aging society. Chinese President Xi Jinping met Central Asian leaders at a summit in Kazakhstan, his second trip to the region in less than a year. The Chinese president arrived in the Kazakh capital yesterday, together with leaders of 5 Central Asian countries. China has been making inroads into the resource-rich region, increasing bilateral trade and investment. Central Asia was under Russia's orbit until the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, but ties have loosened since the war in Ukraine. China overtook Russia to become Kazakhstan's largest trading partner in 2023, but the Kremlin says Beijing's growing influence in the region does not pose a threat. Joining us now is CNA's Olivia Seong in Beijing. First, the significance behind this gathering. Tell us more, Ollie.
Well, this is certainly a high-profile trip. We have to note that this is President Xi's only his third overseas trip for this year, and we've seen Chinese state media reporting throughout the day on his many bilateral meetings that he's been having with the 5 leaders of the Central Asian nations. That's ahead of the larger multilateral summit that's to come later. A common thread, though, has already emerged: the talk of greater cooperation and investment. Now, yesterday, President Xi met his Kazakh counterpart, President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, and the Kazakh president, also known to speak fluent Mandarin and had previously had a stint as a diplomat in Beijing. The two of them sitting down, and during their meeting, President Xi talked about how both countries should practice, quote, true multilateralism and safeguard the common interests of the vast majority of developing countries. Now, this may sound familiar because it's language that President Xi and China has continually used as it has continued to woo other trading partners in the midst of tensions with the U.S. that has imposed those global tariffs on countries around the world, including these 5 Central Asian nations. All of them except Kazakhstan face a baseline tariff of 10% by the U.S. Kazakhstan faced a 27% levy despite the ongoing tariff truce at the moment. Despite that, China continuing to pursue greater trade ties with these countries. Also significant as this China Central Asian Summit is only the second to ever take place and the first to take place in the region of Central Asia. The last was in 2023 in Xi'an in China's Shanxi province. Now, this also against the backdrop of ongoing conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East, plus that G7 meeting in Canada, as the global alliances have continued to be shaken up amid ongoing geopolitical tensions and shifts. And it also comes as the rivalry in the region continues to step up. Just a few days ago, we saw U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio meet his Kazakhstan counterpart in Washington. We also have seen numerous visits from other leaders from other countries to Central Asia as well of late. Ateli.
So you've talked about strengthening cooperation and ties, but are we expecting any sort of tangible outcomes?
Well, we have already seen China and Kazakhstan sign a whole slew of agreements as witnessed by the two countries' leaders, including in areas like energy, aerospace, e-commerce, among others as well. And today, during President Xi's sit-down with Kyrgyzstan, there was also talk about cooperation in emerging sectors and fostering new drivers of growth in areas like clean energy, green minerals, and artificial intelligence. And this really sets the stage for greater cooperation, or at least talk about greater cooperation between China and the Central Asia region as the relationship between both sides have grown. China is Central Asia's largest trading partner, taking over Russia, with trade reaching close to $95 billion last year. Also notable following the launch of the Belt and Road Initiative that was launched by President Xi in Kazakhstan more than a decade ago in 2013. That also has made China a key investor in the region. And one project that we're likely to hear more about is the China-Kyrgyzstan-Uzbekistan Railway, which links China's western Xinjiang region with the two other countries. Construction is set to begin in July and completion expected in 2030. And it's expected to enhance connectivity, improve trade, and reduce reliance on Russian transportation as well. And all this as the foreign ministry here in China has talked about how this visit by President Xi is expected to make room for the joint construction of the Belt and Road project, which continues to be a key part and key avenue that China continues to invest into other countries, including Central Asia. Otelli.
CNA's Olivia Xiong in Beijing. Thanks for that report. Now, leaders of G7 countries meeting in Canada have issued a statement asking for de-escalation in the conflicts plaguing the Middle East, but stopped short of calling for a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. Well, the group reaffirmed Israel's right to defend itself and labelled Iran as a source of instability in the Middle East. The leaders have called on the warring nations to protect the lives of civilians caught in the crossfire. The statement, however, did call for a ceasefire in Gaza. Now, the statement was issued with the backing of US President Donald Trump. Meantime, Mr. Trump has left the G7 summit early, prompting question as to why. Is it a push for peace or preparation for possible military action? CNA's Nick Harper has more from Calgary.
The G7 has become the G6, with Donald Trump departing the summit just halfway through at the end of day one. There is now much speculation as to why the US leader feels he needs to be back in the US capital and not here in Canada. It all seems to be as a result of the unfolding and escalating situation in the Middle East, and that retaliatory strikes and counterstrikes taking place between Israel and Iran. But there is a question as to whether this departure is a push for peace or putting the US on a war footing. We know that he has asked his National Security Council to be prepared for when he lands, and he's asked them to ready the Situation Room. There is some speculation that we could see an increase of Israeli attacks against Iran, or potentially the US getting involved in some way, or perhaps being ready in case Iran decides to strike US bases and assets in the region. Donald Trump, though, has also pushed for peace and has suggested a negotiated truce. Earlier, at the family photo, he was asked by reporters exactly why he was leaving.
Why are you leaving the G7 early for Washington?
Well, I have to be back. Very important. I want to just thank our great host. You did a fantastic job. Thank you in Canada. But you probably see what I see, and I have to be back as soon as I can. And have dinner with these wonderful leaders, and then I get on the plane. I have to be back early. I wish I could stay for tomorrow, but they understand.
Is there a reason,
big,
Mr. President,
this is big stuff.
Do your business?
Well, that big stuff Donald Trump was referring to could be one of those two scenarios, either a push for peace or preparing for the worst. Now, it's not the first time that Donald Trump has left a G7 summit early. The last time that Canada was hosting, back in 2018, he did just that. On that occasion, he was heading to Singapore to take part in the North Korean summit with the leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un. Here in Canada, on day 2, the focus for the remaining G7 nations was meant to be all about Ukraine, a big summit planned with other world leaders being invited, including the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. But with that situation in the Middle East, there is the potential that that Ukrainian summit could be torpedoed, the G7 leaders instead having to focus on the Middle East region rather than the crisis in Ukraine. Nick Harper, CNA, Calgary.
We'll have more on the Israel-Iran conflict later in East Asia tonight, including a report by a correspondent in Tel Aviv on the situation there. Now, staying on the G7 summit, with Mr. Trump's departure, the meeting South Korean President Lee Jae-myung hoped he would have with the U.S. leader will have to wait. He is instead looking forward to a summit with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba on the sidelines of the G7. Mr. Ishiba, who managed to catch Mr. Trump before he departed for Washington, said that the sides failed to agree on a trade deal that would have lowered or removed tariffs for Japan.
これまで日本、アメリカ双方が本当に真摯な議論を精力的に続けました。で、ギリギリまで交渉の可能性を探ってきておるところであります。今なお双方の認識が一致していない。そういう点が残っておりますので、パッケージ全体としての合意には至っておりません。
Time now for a short break, but coming up next on East Asia tonight. The Bank of Japan is tweaking its money supply policy because of uncertainties around trade. Plus,
I'm Roland Lim at Energy Asia 2025 in Kuala Lumpur. Now, with burgeoning demand for energy in Asia, renewable feels less an optional extra and more like a must-have for the region's energy security and climate goals. We hear from green leaders and experts.
hello again. You're watching East Asia tonight, and it is now time for your business update with Henry Yin. So, Henry, energy security in the spotlight again amid all this heightened geopolitical tensions. How are renewables playing in the mix?
Well, renewables are looking more like a must-have as demand for energy grows in Asia. And CNA's Roland Lim has been covering Energy Asia in Kuala Lumpur, speaking with multiple experts across the field. He reports on what they are saying about Asia's green energy push.
The International Energy Agency reports that electricity demand in Southeast Asia jumped more than 7% in 2024 and set to keep rising around 4.5% annually. And China's power use, well, it grew about 7% last year, forecast to climb around 6% per year through to 2027. And that makes it imperative for Asia to scale renewables to cover more than a third of new demand by 2035, even as the region diversifies beyond gas and coal. Su Eun Tan of the International Energy Agency believes that in order to meet that demand, investments in 3 areas are critical.
One, the need to diversify our energy supply. Secondly, the importance of regulatory certainty to encourage more investment in energy. And thirdly, the need for international cooperation. In the case specifically for fossil fuels for this region, we do see gas, for example, continuing to grow by about 30% between now and 2050 for the Asia-Pacific region. So it will remain a critical fuel source. But from an energy security angle, it is important to pursue as many different energy sources as possible, including, very importantly, renewable energy, which we see a lot of significant potential for in this region, up to 20 terawatts.
And while gas continues to be a transition hydrocarbon fuel into 2050, renewables are essential to balance security and sustainability, says Ms. Tan. But the broader economic backdrop is challenging. Miguel Fonseca of EDB Renewables points out that today's headwinds aren't unique to clean energy.
I think that the slowdown is structural to all sectors in the sense that we are in an unstable geopolitical context with rising interest rates. So I think it's rough on all sectors. It's not a particular thing of renewables. I would say even quite the opposite. If we take the example of China that has pushed a lot in renewables, it's not because of just a green transition. It's a way to isolate themselves from being dependent on oil imports and geopolitical instability. So I think that regions need to understand that for safety purpose, security, national security, but also for competitiveness in terms of cost, renewables are a good ingredient and a natural and primordial ingredient. So I do see some headwinds, but are not specific to the sector. I think that they're cross-sectorial. I think there is some now dogmatism and political aspects coming into play, but in the end I see the investments and year-on-year estimates of how much renewables will be deployed keep being beaten because the technology is there in terms of economic terms and geopolitical terms makes sense to invest.
Now, Mr. Fonseca leads one of the fastest growing renewable companies in the region and has overseen the deployment of thousands of megawatts of wind, solar and storage capacity across Southeast Asia. And for hard-to-abate sectors, hydrogen is top of mind. Now, Sushil Prohit of Gentari, the renewable arm of state-owned Malaysian oil giant Petronas, shared how his company is tackling the hydrogen puzzle.
We are pushing quite a bit on the hydrogen side. We believe that hydrogen will become a part of the energy system, especially to decarbonize hard-to-abate sectors. We are working in places where hydrogen can actually be produced at a reasonable cost. India is clearly one of the places where we are developing hydrogen. We are also developing a hydrogen hub in Sarawak. We are also developing projects in the peninsula side. So we are actually, at this point of time, developing projects where it is not only about developing any project. You need to make sure that you are able to optimize every single pieces of the puzzle to make hydrogen viable for the customers.
Together, these insights sketch a clear picture. Asia's renewable trends driven by the necessity to diversify beyond fossil fuels. At Energy Asia 2025, delegates are discussing policy frameworks to give investors confidence, exploring blended finance models and forging regional partnerships from cross-border grids to shared hydrogen corridors. The message: Asia must pursue an energy mix that secures supply today while scaling clean technologies for tomorrow. Roland Lim, CNA, Kuala Lumpur.
Choppy trade in oil markets following another day of fighting between Israel and Iran. The two nations are maintaining air attacks even as G7 leaders in Canada called for a de-escalation. While checking oil prices at the moment, WTI up by 1.6%, while Brent trading at $74.27 per barrel level over there, and risk-off sentiment still persisting among traders. Checking the precious metal gold is now hovering just above 3,380 level over there. And also the reaction in stocks more guarded in comparison to commodities. We're looking at a mixed picture with MSCI World Index down by 0.2%. For Shanghai Composite Index is down only marginally, while Nikkei and Kospi remain above water. While the heightened risk in the Middle East is also starting to prompt ship owners away from one of the world's most critical oil choke points, the Strait of Hormuz, although there has been no major attacks on the shipping route. A representative of the world's largest shipping association, BIMCO, have reported a modest drop in the number of ships there. And costs to ship fuel from the Middle East surged as well in recent days due to the escalating tensions. Data from the Baltic Exchange showed that rates to transport oil to East Asia from the Middle East have surged about 20% in the 3 sessions to Monday. The Strait of Hormuz sees about a fifth of the world's oil shipments pass through it, and any disruption would severely impact the global economy, although International Energy Agency has reported that oil markets are well supplied, barring any major interruption. And Vendor Insights' Vandana Hari explains why she thinks oil markets remain relatively complacent, with the stocks having yet to assume some of the most worrisome scenarios.
What has not happened is the market pricing in some of the worst case scenarios, which would affect substantial flows of Middle Eastern oil. Now, just to put that in context, the Iran plus its neighboring countries supply nearly 25 million barrels per day of oil. So that's almost a quarter of the global daily consumption. And then you mentioned Strait of Hormuz. So that Iran blockading it is a potential worst case scenario, which also the market is not pricing in, because, and the reason I say that is these worst case scenarios would have seen prices climbing towards 100 and into triple digits. So what that also tells you is while the market is on edge and is sort of poised and is factoring in some disruption potentially, it is not looking at the worst case scenarios. So indeed, as we said in our note to clients over the weekend, it is not our base case scenario that Iran will blockade the Strait of Hormuz. Nearly 20 million barrels per day of oil passes through it. The vast majority is from Iran's neighbors. So I highly doubt that Iran would now risk hostilities with all its Arab neighbors in addition to taking on Israel.
Bank of Japan has revealed a plan to slow its bond buying program in the next fiscal year. From April 2026, the central bank will reduce government bond purchases by 200 billion Japanese yen per quarter. It marks a much slower pace from the current 400 billion Japanese yen and a sign of caution following heightened market volatility. BOJ Governor Kazuo Ueda explained that the decision was aimed at preventing future instability in bond markets. It was a widely anticipated move, which is in line with the central bank's preference to cautiously remove remnants of its massive decade-long stimulus. The BOJ announced the plan at the conclusion of its monthly policy meeting, where it also kept interest rates steady at 0.5% as expected. The EU has refused to hold a high-level economic dialogue with China ahead of a leaders' summit next month over what it sees as a lack of progress over trade disputes, according to the Financial Times. The move comes as trade tensions mount between the EU and China, with both locked in tit-for-tat actions, the most recent being a ban on Chinese medical devices from public procurement contracts and anti-dumping duties on Chinese plywood by the EU. The EU and China mark 50 years of diplomatic ties this year, but trade tensions have dampened the mood. Next month's summit in Beijing will be represented by Li Qiang, the country's #2 official, instead of President Xi Jinping, a move Brussels sees as a snub. China's foreign ministry, however, says that Beijing is willing to work with Brussels to promote the stable and long-term development of relations between the two. And that's all for business. Back to you, Ateli.
Thanks so very much for that, Henry. Well, we are going for another break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Israel and Iran trading attacks for a 5th straight day. We'll get you the latest from the ground. And a report warns of a new nuclear arms race led by major powers, with China's arsenal growing faster than any other country. We'll be speaking with an expert on the implications in just a moment. This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Chinese President Xi Jinping met Central Asian leaders at a summit in Kazakhstan, his second trip to the region in less than a year. The US president leaves the G7 summit in Canada early, with conflicting messages from him and his staff on the reason why. And blasts in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, and citizens fleeing Tehran. The two sides continue to exchange fire in day 5 of the conflict. Now, Iran says that it launched a more powerful wave of missiles towards Israel as strikes between the arch foes continue for a 5th straight day. China, meanwhile, has called on the warring sides to take immediate measures to cool down tensions. Well, air raid sirens and loud booms were heard over Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, while Iran's ground forces claimed it destroyed strategic targets in Israel overnight. On the Israeli side, the IDF said it killed Iran's wartime chief of staff after conducting several strikes in western Iran. Ali Shadmani was the closest aide to Supreme Leader Khamenei. And in Israel, emergency responders were deployed to several locations. A projectile that crashed in Herzliya damaged an 8-story building and set ablaze an empty bus in a coastal city. No casualties have been reported. For more, we are joined now by Trent Murray in Tel Aviv. Now, Trent, you heard all that bombardment we were describing about earlier. Walk us through the mood in Israel and also the government's reaction.
That's right. It was a rare daytime attack that we've seen. Generally in the past, these waves of ballistic missiles come during the night, but this one occurred mid-morning. We are being told there was around 30 ballistic missiles fired, predominantly towards Tel Aviv. Certainly here we heard while we were in the shelter a number of blasts across the city, as well as the launch of those interceptor missiles, which are used as part of Israel's air defence system in order to try and prevent these targets hitting the ground. Now, what we are being told by the ambulance service here is that there are no reports of casualties or injuries. It seems that most of them were intercepted, but the ones that did fall have largely hit open areas, or as we heard there, that bus depot where an empty bus caught on fire. Now, of course, the state of emergency still does remain in place here. The schools are closed, most businesses are closed, and the government is asking people to make sure that they keep a close eye on their mobile phone for those alerts that come through, warning them to get to their nearest shelter or safe room. The travel situation also increasingly in focus, with a number of foreign nationals here now receiving their advice from governments to leave, the latest being the Chinese embassy here in Israel sending out a message to local citizens telling them to try and find a way out. The main route right now is via the land border into Jordan and then departing via the capital there, Amman. Of course, the airport here does remain closed, as does the airspace. But Israel's Transport Ministry has also said it's working on a plan to potentially deploy cruise ships and ferries in order to bring people in and out via the neighbouring island of Cyprus.
Right, Trent, what about Iran, though? The residents there, how are they dealing with this conflict? And also there's this warning from Donald Trump that residents of Tehran should evacuate.
And that warning seems to be now playing out on the ground, because we are hearing that much of downtown Tehran is emptying out. Most shops there also closed, including at the city's famous Grand Bazaar. Quite unprecedented for it to close. The last time we saw that was during the COVID-19 pandemic. We are being told traffic is bumper to bumper on the motorways leaving the city, predominantly towards the west, the Caspian Sea region. And once again, foreign governments increasingly concerned about their nationals there. We saw overnight India's government work to evacuate a number of students into Armenia. Pakistan has also worked on plans to get some of its nationals out. And again, Beijing is saying it is working on plans to try and help get Chinese nationals out, warning them that the best way right now is to leave, again, via the land border crossings, either into Armenia, like the Indian government did, or also into Turkey.
Well, thanks so very much for that report, Trent Murray, live from Tel Aviv. It looks like China is adding to its nuclear arsenal faster than any other country. Well, that's according to a report from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, or CIPRI, which warns of an arms race led by big powers. Well, the finding follows on the heels of a separate report from the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which highlighted that the nuclear-armed nations spent more than $100 billion on their weapons last year. CIPRI says that China now has at least 600 nuclear warheads in its possession. That number is believed to have grown by 100 a year since 2023. The quantity of warheads owned by the 8 other nuclear states have remained relatively stable, with a report assessing India to have made efforts into producing longer-range weapons capable of hitting targets across China. CIPRI adds that China's modernization covers a broad range of supporting processes, including facilities to process nuclear material that goes into bomb cores, and also the means to check, certify, and develop new weapons. Beijing, when asked about the findings, defended its atomic arsenal.
中方对有关报告不作评论。我想强调，中国一直坚持自卫防御核战略，始终将核力量维持在国家安全需要的最低水平，不参与军备竞赛。
CIPRI also noted that Donald Trump's return to the White House has added to unease over global security. Its allies, Japan and South Korea, for example, well, they're both covered under Washington's nuclear umbrella, are concerned about America's security commitment. And this has renewed debates over how such forms of deterrence can be preserved for stability. And for more insights, we are joined now by Bernard Liu, Senior Fellow of the Military Studies Program at RSIS. Well, thanks for joining us this evening, Dr. Liu. First up, do you see the world entering this new era, as we see nuclear powers ramping up their arsenals once again?
In a sense, the world is entering a new era. I think it's worth mentioning that, particularly for the United States and to a lesser extent Russia, some elements of their existing nuclear arsenals have been in existence for quite some time and need modernization in that regard. So that, to some extent, probably explains some of the spending that was reported.
Well, I want to hone in on China here. The report says they've added some 100 nuclear warheads in just the past year alone, making this arsenal the fastest growing in the world. Walk us through what exactly is motivating Beijing to build up its supply.
Well, as the data indicates, China's nuclear arsenal, in terms of the number of nuclear warheads, is clearly far behind that of the United States and of Russia. That's not to say that the Chinese intend to reach a level of parity with with the other two superpowers, but it is clear that the Chinese feel that they need to increase their nuclear arsenals as such.
And earlier we also mentioned that the report pointing to China in terms of expanding its supporting capabilities from uranium processing to testing infrastructure, all this, behind the scenes investment, how significant is it?
It's potentially important in the sense that what the Chinese have been doing in terms of but not so much the nuclear warheads itself, but more the delivery systems, the rockets. As it stands right now, China's missile forces tend to be road mobile, tend to be solid fueled, and that at one level gives them a level of survivability which would be important for China's deterrence posture. On the other hand, the fact that they are solid fuel rockets means that they can be deployed in war over very, very short notice. So it's really difficult right now to make sense accurately of what the Chinese are doing. In terms of modernizing their nuclear weapons, that's clearly moving a step forward for them.
I want to talk about how, Russia and US, basically, they still hold the bulk of nuclear warheads, right? But we also see China playing catch up, quite a fair bit to do. But there is this three-player dynamic now. How does that differ from a two-player model?
It doesn't really differ in the sense that the United States had, especially after China demonstrated its nuclear capability decades ago, the United States had always maintained a targeting document that would not just focus on the former Soviet Union, but it would also focus on potentially strategic targets in China. So it doesn't really change in that sense. That nothing has changed in that sense, but it does make things more complicated in the sense that you have to hope that if it is a China-Russia axis, that the two working fairly well in a fairly tightly coordinated fashion with one another. It changes the dynamic in the sense that the United States has to go back to focusing on a number of fronts, not just Russia alone, in terms of its early warning systems.
And we've got countries like, just back to the region, Japan, South Korea. They are, reportedly uneasy under the U.S. nuclear umbrella, especially with political uncertainty in Washington. I'm curious to know, do you think those worries are justified, and why?
I don't think those worries are justified. I mean, surely any rational calculus in Washington, D.C. would see a nuclear-armed Japan and or South Korea as making things even more complicated. Complicated precisely because from China's perspective, a nuclear-armed Japan or South Korea is going to mean that they have very, very little warning time. All it takes is a few minutes for potentially a nuclear weapon launched by either Japan or South Korea to hit targets in China. That makes the dynamic between the three Northeast Asian powers very, very delicate, very, very volatile. In that regard, I don't think Washington, D.C. would ever countenance either Japan or South Korea having its own nuclear arsenal. So they will take every step possible, I would imagine, to reassure both Tokyo as well as Seoul that the nuclear umbrella is sound.
Yeah, and I just want to move on to this Iran-related question about what's happening now, this whole, preempted attack by Israel against Iran, over the reason that Tehran could one day wield their nuclear weapon, right, against its adversaries. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, how do you think other countries are looking at this? How are they interpreting it, especially those with the nuclear capabilities, that they could also use that as an excuse one day, to use their nuclear arms?
Well, we've only ever used nuclear weapons twice, and that was in 1945 against Japan, as we all know. Ever since then, the nuclear powers have been relatively careful in terms of managing conflicts and tensions between one another. And if there has been a case of shooting wars, particularly in the case of India and Pakistan, they've always, up to this point in time at least, ensured that it never crossed that nuclear threshold, that it never broke that nuclear taboo. So in that regard, the countries that are already nuclear, countries like North Korea, India or Pakistan, their nuclear arsenals, in a sense, as long as that taboo holds, those nuclear arsenals remain safe.
Right. And finally, just before we let you go, very quickly, in today's world of, cyber attacks, if hybrid warfare, there's gray zone tactics, all of that being used, how effective is nuclear deterrence as a tool for maintaining security?
Unfortunately, we are all living with the legacy of the first major study of nuclear weapons. In 1946, the American strategist published the book, The Absolute Weapon. It was motivated by the nuclear bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we have come to see nuclear weapons as that absolute weapon. If there's one thing that's going to ensure that your country remains safe, it's a nuclear arsenal. That's the kind of thinking that we are saddled with, and I don't think we're ever going to lose that, at least not for the foreseeable future.
All right, many thanks for your time and thoughts. Bernard Liu there, Senior Fellow of the Military Studies Program at RSIS. Russia's top presidential security advisor, Sergei Shoigu, is in Pyongyang to hold meetings with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. It's the second time Mr. Shoigu, in less than 2 weeks, has traveled there. According to Russian news agency Interfax, Mr. Shoigu was, quote, on special instructions from Russian President Vladimir Putin to hold talks with Mr. Kim on implementing agreements reached during Mr. Shoigu's visit earlier this month. Both sides had agreed to further develop ties under the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty signed by Mr. Putin and Mr. Kim last year. The two countries have rapidly strengthened their diplomatic and security ties in recent years. Now, North Korea in April confirmed it had deployed troops to Russia in support of its war against Ukraine, and countries have accused Pyongyang of ramping up military support for Moscow. South Korea also suspects Russia of providing advanced technology to Pyongyang in exchange for its help. China's new generation stealth fighter, the J-35A, made its first international appearance at the Paris Air Show this week. The mid-sized stealth fighter is said to be capable of both air superiority and strike missions against ground and sea targets. It's one of 24 military and civilian aircraft models China's showcasing in Paris. Also on show, the battle-tested J-10CE, armed with China's top-tier long-range PL-15E missiles. Pakistan's J-10CEs armed with those missiles have reportedly downed 2 Indian fighter jets during a skirmish last month. Coming up next on East Asia tonight, China's healthcare services are under pressure amid a rapidly aging society. Can the private sector and even foreign investors fill the gap? Cambodia's ultimatum to Thailand has expired. On Monday morning, Senate President Hun Sen gave the Thai government 24 hours to resume border operations. The border row has flared up in the past month, with Cambodia turning to the International Court of Justice to settle the dispute. Now, AP correspondent Jeremy Koh explains how we got here.
The current border dispute between Thailand and Cambodia has deep historical roots, and it involves complex, long-running territorial claims along their shared border. This latest skirmish flared up on 28th of May, almost 3 weeks ago, leaving 1 Cambodian soldier dead. But there are conflicting reports on what happened. Phnom Penh says Thai soldiers had attacked Cambodian troops who had been on a routine border patrol, but Bangkok says the clash took place after Cambodian soldiers began firing first. The subsequent war of words saw tensions rising between the 2 ASEAN member states, and both emphasized their right to take military action. Troops were also mobilized on both sides of the border. But following a series of meetings between the 2 sides, they agreed to de-escalate tensions and maintain communication. On the ground, though, it was a different picture. There were temporary border checkpoint closures, nationalistic messages from the leadership, and we saw Phnom Penh halt imports of Thai electricity, internet services, and even banned Thai media content. Analysts say the tough talk and action are aimed at drumming up nationalist support among their own domestic audience. And both governments are under pressure to assert their sovereignty despite their commitment to a peaceful resolution. Disputed temples have been excluded from bilateral talks, and both sides have differing attitudes towards international arbitration, which saw the judgment go in Cambodia's favor twice. Thailand wants to resolve the issue through bilateral talks, but that seems to be tough. Lower-level delegations from both sides held talks at the weekend in Phnom Penh, but barely a day after they ended came an ultimatum from Cambodia to Thailand. Jeremy Koh, Bangkok.
China's population may have started aging later than other societies, but it's also doing so more quickly. As Chinese authorities seek to address fast-growing healthcare needs, this has presented opportunities for the private sector and for foreign investors. CNA's Lauren Ong has more.
Spanning 3.5 million square feet, or about 40 football fields, this project in northern China's Tianjin city has been dubbed by its developer a healthcare and business city in its own right. Located next to the high-speed rail station to cater to those living beyond Tianjin 2, the project was completed last year and combines elder care facilities, hotels, as well as a medical cluster on the plot. The latest and biggest project by Singapore real estate and healthcare firm Perennial Holdings in China includes the first private tertiary general hospital in the country to be wholly owned by a foreign company, getting the green light after China relaxed in some regions last year.
There are a number of the upper middle class Chinese patients go to seek medical advices and treatment elsewhere, be it Japan, be it Europe, be it America. So they want to retain these people in China so that you don't lose this spending, right? So the government sector, they realize that they can't do this because they cannot service this class of customer. So they open up to private sector like us.
The company says it's focusing on the more affluent first and second-tier cities and is looking to replicate such large-scale projects, including in southwestern China's Kunming. This comes as over a fifth of China's population, or about 237 million people, are aged 60 and above, with that number expected to soar to more than 400 million by 2035. By mid-2024, China had more than 400,000 nursing homes and elder care facilities, double the number in 2019, and the growth isn't slowing. Plus, as aging population challenges persist, authorities are also shifting their focus on the quality of these services. China's silver economy is touted to exceed $4 trillion by 2035, an emerging industry the country is banking on as it faces headwinds in traditional sectors like real estate and sees external pressures affecting exports. Perennial pivoting too to make healthcare its key growth driver in China. It's also looking to attract medical tourists from overseas in line with the Chinese government's push.
This is a sector which is not affected by trade war. It's not affected by tariff. I don't have to, it is internal consumption, and I don't have to worry about export. So I think we have a long growth path for the next 10, 20 years.
But experts say there could be challenges. Local media reported a shortage of over 1.7 million care home workers in 2023.
Each care worker has very low social status and low pay. Is a low pay job. So that's why this is not a job actually favored by people.
The question is how to bridge the gap as elder care becomes more of a necessity.
The last few decades, the booming economy has also resulted in smaller families, right? And a one-child policy. If the family can't cope with the need that the older person requires, then they will have no choice but to build up more nursing homes. So it will continue to grow in terms of demand. But on the other hand, whether China will also accept more foreign care workers.
This is also as China explores other care models and a mindset shift.
尽力照顾吧，实在不行到时候再说吧。我觉得嘛，放在养老院他们会觉得有点孤单。
我认为不应该算不孝顺，那也得是征得父母的同意，是吧？得随他们的心意。
因为这个现在这个新时期、新时代的这个人的思想理念都发生很大的变化，这个和个人的生活条件改善有很大的关系。
你指的是20年代以后的是吗？21世纪的孩子是吗？他们会思想更前卫一些吧。
Experts say deeply held values of filial piety in Chinese culture increasingly depend on whether adult children have the ability to care for their elderly parents on their own. Lauren Ong, CNA, Tianjin, China.
Now some stories from media outlets in East Asia. Kyoto says around 200 kilograms of premium cherries was stolen from a Japanese orchard. The stolen bounty was worth 1 million yen, or about $7,000. The Korean Herald reports that South Koreans could receive up to $367 in cash handouts if an upcoming budget bill is passed. The handout program aims to spur domestic consumption to boost the shrinking economy. And Global Times reports that a father and son in China were rescued 26 hours after they were swept out to sea. The duo had been touring the coast of Hainan Island when they were overpowered by a big wave caused by Typhoon Wu-tip. And that's East Asia Tonight this Tuesday. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. And look for us as well on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for your company.